Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we need to talk about this upcoming 2024 Western Conference in the NBA because it is completely ridiculous. Right now is the part of the offseason where me, pretty much every other content creator, I'm sure a lot of you, are in predictions mode. We've been sitting with this offseason for basically a month, couple months now at this point, where we know all the trades that have gone down, we know which free agent acquisitions are there, we're anticipating jumps from young players, maybe some regression from some teams. We're trying to figure out, okay, how is the NBA going to look for this upcoming season? And a lot of people are going to put together official predictions, me included. I've been doing a bunch of predictions on this channel over the past month or so. We did bold predictions, 10 of those. We did bold predictions for every team. We did breakout players for every team. We talked about some award races, specifically MVP and Rookie of the Year. I might do more of those videos coming up here soon. I've made some individual team videos on squads that I think could be pretty good or I'm excited to watch. There are a lot of predictions flying around from me and everyone else, and by the time the season rolls around, I'm going to make a full video predicting where every single team in both conferences finishes, who makes the playoffs, who doesn't, who wins the NBA Finals, who makes it there from each conference in the first place, and everything in between, including all the major awards. I do that every single year, and this year is going to be no different. And always, it is really hard to make predictions, not just in the NBA, but in sports in general, because as much knowledge as you think you may have, there's always going to be something that completely throws you off. You're going to be wrong about a team, a player, progression isn't going to go the way you thought for maybe a younger team, an older team will take a big time hit, a free agent acquisition you thought would work out just doesn't work. A bunch of reasons can cause things to go wrong for you, but this year in particular feels like it's going to be the hardest year that I've ever had to make predictions here on YouTube. I have no idea what to say for some of these teams, specifically in that Western Conference. Now, don't get me wrong, the Eastern Conference is difficult to predict in its own right. I'm going to probably go into that video and make a fool of myself by the end of the year, but I feel like I have a better grasp of who the top teams are, who's kind of middle of the pack, who's going to regress, progress. I just feel like I have a better grasp on how the Eastern Conference is going to go. Like, there are 10 or so teams that I feel pretty good about them making the play-in tournament out there in the East. But in the Western Conference, there are 11 teams that I think should pretty soundly make the playoffs, and there's 8 spots. Like, one of those 11 teams I think really should make the playoffs isn't even going to make the play-in tournament. So today, I want to talk a bit about the Western Conference, why it's so difficult to predict, why I think there's no way anybody's going to get it right, and ultimately, why it's just so stacked. Let's start off by recapping last year's Western Conference standings, with the Denver Nuggets, the reigning champions, in the 1 spot, the Grizzlies at the 2, Kings at the 3, Suns at the 4, Clippers at the 5, the Golden State Warriors at the 6 spot, the 7-seeded Los Angeles Lakers. At 8, we had the Timberwolves, 9, we had the Pelicans, and wrapping up the play-in teams, we had the Oklahoma City Thunder. In the lottery were the Mavericks, the Jazz, the Blazers, the Rockets, and the Spurs. It was a really tight conference pretty much the entire year. I mean, you take a look at the standings, the difference between the 1-seeded Nuggets and the 2-seeded Grizzlies was 2 games, just 5 games between the Kings and the Nuggets, and between the 4-seeded Suns and the 10-seeded Thunder were just 5 games. It was really close. You probably remember that a lot of these spots, you know, the Suns, the Clippers, the Warriors, the Lakers, Timberwolves, a lot of these teams, it came down to the final day of the regular season to see who was ending up where, who was playing each other in the first round of the playoffs. And I anticipate it's probably going to be pretty similar again this year, where we don't know who's playing who until like the very final moments of the regular season. This is because not only are a lot of these squads in the West good, but it feels like almost all of them got better in some way or are just good enough to remain in the spot that they already were or somewhere close to it. Now, I mentioned I think there are 11 teams that I feel pretty comfortable about potentially making the playoffs, and those are the top 11 teams this past season in the West. That leaves the Jazz, the Blazers, the Rockets, and the Spurs as the 4 teams that I currently have outside looking in. And I still think all these teams are going to be somewhat competitive. To me, assuming they do trade Dame at some point early in the season, I think the Blazers are, again, not going to be very good. But they still do have Scoot Henderson, who I think is going to be amazing as a rookie. He's a high-level playmaker, is an electric athlete. He's going to set up his teammates well, and those are teammates that include Anthony Simons, who averaged over 20 points per game this past year. Jerry Grant, who just got $160 million, which is certainly an overpay, but he earned a big-time bag because he was great this past season. You've got a bunch of other solid players on the Blazers roster too, like for example Nas Little. You've got Yusuf Nurkic, amongst others. That's not a bad team over there in Portland, even though if they trade Dame, and they might get something good too from the Dame trade, they're probably my 15th seed in the Western Conference at this point. The Spurs add Victor Wembanyama, one of the greatest prospects we've ever seen. I think he's going to take that defense up a massive notch alongside Jeremy Sohan, who's a great defender. Zach Collins with an underrated season. Great scorers like Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, who I think is in for a big-time breakout season. other young talents like Trey Jones, Malachi Branham. They've got a lot of talent over there in San Antonio, so even if they're not great, they're still going to be competitive. Same thing for the Rockets, who add Dylan Brooks to try and help with that defense. Ime Udoka as the head coach, Fred VanVleet, who's an all-star not too long ago. We could see breakout seasons from Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr., amongst others. Even though I don't think they're going to make the play-in tournament, I think they're going to be really competitive. The Jazz, again, same thing. They were in that play-in race until right at the end of the season when they dealt with some injuries. Lowry's an all-star. Walker Kessler, one of the best up-and-coming young rim protectors. They had a great draft class, in my opinion. Sexton, Jordan Clarkson. I think this team is also well coached by Will Hardy. That's a good squad. So all four of those teams, again, I don't think they're going to make the play-in tournament at this point. Maybe something changes before the season that changes my mind on one of those teams. But for right now, those are my four teams that are on the outside looking in. So that does leave, again, 11 teams to make 8 playoff spots. And I don't know how I'm going to pick between these teams because I think all 11 of the remaining squads are very, very capable of not just making the playoffs, but being one of the higher seeds in the West. So let's go ahead and talk about each and every one of these teams. The Nuggets up there at the top. I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs unless Nikola Jokic has a season-ending injury early on in the year. They will be in the playoff picture 100%. I think they're probably going to be the 1 seed again, or at least somewhere up there towards the top. Maybe they don't take the regular season that seriously because they are coming off an NBA Finals win, but nobody's going to tell you they aren't going to make the playoffs. That would be absurd. So the Nuggets are kind of a lock. A couple of these other teams at the top I feel like are probably locks, but there are some things that make me feel like they could be towards the bottom, like in the play-in tournament, and when you get to the play-in tournament, anything could happen. One of those teams is the Memphis Grizzlies. If Ja Morant was playing the full season, I think they'd be perfectly fine, but they are going to be missing him for the first 25 games. Now, in the past, the Grizzlies have been fine without Ja Morant. They've not only stayed afloat, but they've been pretty good, even when Ja isn't playing, which is astounding, the fact that they're good enough to remain at a decent level without an all-star, all-NBA caliber guard in Ja. It says a lot about how this team is built, but it is a different team from previous years. They no longer have Tyus Jones, that steady, high-level playmaking, low-turnover guard to step in when Ja is out so that he can just keep that offense flowing. They don't have him anymore. They do have Marcus Smart, who can also play a bit of that role, but he's not quite as steady. He's a bit more erratic. Now, the defense is a lot better with him than it was with Tyus Jones, so maybe that helps them just be this defensive stalwart team that just shuts everybody down, but they also did lose Dylan Brooks, who was an all-defensive guy this past year, so it's a bit of a trade-off, and we don't know what's going to happen at the wing position with them. Who's going to be starting there at the 3? Maybe it is Marcus Smart, Desmond Bane, Ja Morant, those 3 guys playing the 1, 2, 3 spots when Ja does return. How does that look? Is it going to take time for Marcus Smart to not only gel with the team the first time when he first gets there and Ja's out, but when Ja comes back, how do they then gel again? Do they have to have 2 different chemistry building periods? I don't know. There's a lot of questions with this Grizzlies team right now. They're also going to still be missing Brandon Clark for part of the season too, which he's phenomenal. He really was missed this past year when they tried to face off against the Lakers in the playoffs. The Grizzlies have some question marks. I still think they're going to make the playoffs, but I wouldn't be surprised if they slid down the standings a little bit with that Ja absence and some of that gelling issue that I think that they might run into at some point during the season. Then we have the Sacramento Kings, who shocked the world and made the playoffs as the 3 seed this past year. I think, again, they're going to be really good. That offense is ridiculous, and they add some pieces that I think are going to help it even more. Chris Duarte, Sasha Vezenkov coming from overseas, who's a great scorer, who's going to just shoot the lights out of the ball. This Kings team has so many players that can come in and just shoot 40% from 3, hit 4 or 5 threes on you from pretty much out of nowhere. They are amazing. They're well coached by Mike Brown, but they were one of the healthiest teams in the entire league this past year in terms of games played. If they face some injuries, some of the injuries that teams last year ended up facing, they could slide down the standings. Maybe they are in for a bit of regression. I think they got better, but it is something to keep an eye on. The Phoenix Suns definitely got better, adding Bradley Beal alongside Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton. I like Frank Vogel as a defensive-minded coach to get them to buy in on that end. I like the role players they brought in with Keita Bates-Diop, Yuta Watanabe, amongst others. I think this is a really good team, one of my favorites out there in the Western Conference. But Kevin Durant's injury-prone. Devin Booker has been recently. Bradley Beal's injury-prone. And if a couple of those stars miss time, the supporting cast isn't great. They're not really going to be able to keep up with, again, a highly competitive West, where I don't think there's a single, really bad team, 1 through 15. Suns. So the Suns, I think, are going to be good, but if those injury-prone stars, again, have those problems, they could slide down a little bit. The Los Angeles Clippers, we know they're injury-prone. It happens every single year. They did say they're going to take the regular season more seriously this time, and the NBA actually today, as I'm recording this video, implemented new rules that prevent teams from resting 2 stars on the same night, and certain restrictions on resting stars for home games and this and that. Like, the Clippers aren't going to be able to pull the usual load management thing, but even if they aren't load managing, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard both have dealt with injuries. It's an older roster that might deal with injuries, and as a supporting cast, I don't love it compared to some of the supporting cast that the Clippers have had in years past. So that's a team that could be up and down in the standings. The Golden State Warriors are almost assuredly going to make the playoffs. I would doubt that they do, with Steph, with Clay, with Draymond, Steve Kerr, Andrew Wiggins, missed a lot of the year last year, but last season, they were abysmal on the road. They were 11-30 away from Golden State. Is that going to be an issue again? How's the defense going to look on the road, which again was a big concern? How does Chris Paul look? Apparently they're thinking about starting him, which is a surprise to me. I thought they might try it at some point, but he's supposed to be the full-time starter from day one, so they've got some question marks. The Lakers, I think, are going to be really good, but LeBron and Anthony Davis, again, both injury prone. They could certainly miss some time. The Timberwolves, I think they could take a jump with Anthony Edwards potentially becoming a superstar. Rudy Gobert, Cat having another year to build chemistry. I think Jaden McDaniels is really good. I like their offseason. This is a team that I made a video about, and I think if they really put it all together, they could jump up pretty high in the standings. They went 42-40 with Cat missing a large majority of the season. Then at the 9 spot, there's the Pelicans, who are the 1 seed for a good portion at the beginning of the season when they were somewhat healthy. And I say somewhat because Zion was playing, but Ingram really wasn't there. We really never saw Ingram and Zion on the court consistently together, and they were still one of the top seeds. When Zion went down with injury, they of course plummeted down the standings and ultimately missed out on the playoffs, losing to the Thunder in the play-in tournament. But this is a team that if they stay fully healthy, they're loaded with weapons. Zion is, in my opinion, right there at a top 15 player. Ingram is an all-star caliber guy. They've got great talent all up and down the roster. The Trey Murphy injury does hurt. I think he was in for a great season. Hopefully he's able to come back soon, but that's a great team over there. Again, we don't know what's going to happen with injuries, but if they stay healthy, they could be one of the best teams in the West, and they finished 9th this past season. Then there's the Thunder, who shocked the world this past year and made it into the play-in tournament, even though Chet Holmgren went down with injury. Now he comes back to a team that was already pretty solid defensively. He's going to change things, plus Cason Wallace, a great defensive guard. Shea was an All-NBA first teamer. He's becoming a superstar. What progression could we see from Josh Giddey, from Jalen Williams? Vasilij Micic comes over from the EuroLeague, where he's been an MVP. He comes in now as a high-level shooter and a playmaker to help bolster that offense. This is a Thunder team that a lot of people think, as a young squad, could really take that leap this season and jump up to like 45, up to 50 wins with these new additions and the return of Chet Holmgren. They're also well coached by Mark Daigneault. It's a stacked squad over there, and as a Thunder fan, I'm biased, and I think we should certainly be in the playoffs. But again, this past year, we were the 10 seed. Not to mention the Dallas Mavericks, who didn't even make the playoffs and have one of the best players in the world, a top 5 guy in Luka Doncic. They had a Kyrie Irving at the deadline, which didn't work, but I felt like they bolstered their roster pretty well this offseason to make it work better. Defenders now on the team, like Grant Williams, for example, Josh Green, could take a bit of a jump. I like the addition of Derrick Jones Jr. to this team. I like that they added Derek Lively in the draft. I still worry a bit about that center position, but there's time to figure it out, and I don't think it's horrific at the moment. Seth Curry gives them another shooter. This is a good team, and when you have Luka Doncic, you have to imagine that the Mavericks are probably up there in playoff conversations, but they didn't even make the play-in tournament this past year. Every single team I mentioned there, in my opinion, is 100% playoff caliber, but only 8 teams can actually make the playoffs. This is why it's so difficult, because so many of these teams, like the Mavericks, you think they would take a jump. If you told someone last year that the Mavericks didn't make the playoffs, they would have thought you were crazy, but ultimately they didn't. We'll probably see that again with a team this year, but I don't know how to predict that, and I think they could be good. I think the Thunder, a young team, can take a jump. The Pelicans, if they can stay healthy, they can take a jump. If Ant takes a jump, the Timberwolves rise up the standings. The Lakers got way better and were great after the deadline. I'd imagine they're one of the top seeds. There's the Warriors, who are consistently in there. The Suns added Bradley Beal. The Clippers have Kawhi and Paul George if they stay on the court. The Kings were great. The Grizzlies were great. The Nuggets are the reigning champions. Who doesn't make the playoffs in this Western Conference? This is what I've been thinking about consistently, because eventually I feel like, oh, it'll probably fall into place. But to be honest, it's probably just going to come down to which teams are actually the healthiest. If one of these teams deals with significant injury for a majority of the season, we could see one of these squads that might be looked at right now as a championship contender or one of the best in the West suddenly not even making the play-in tournament. That's how close this Western Conference is. You're going to have to be fighting every single night you play one of these West teams, with every team 1 through 15 at least decent. Like I said earlier, I wouldn't be surprised if it comes down to the final day of the regular season, where if you win there, it could decide if you're like the 3 seed or you're in the play-in tournament. That's how close I anticipate this conference being, and I'm so excited for that. Watching the conference standings shift drastically after every single game last year was so much fun. I love when there's parity like this. I think there's more parity in the league now than there's probably ever been. It's a great time to be a basketball fan. It's not a great time to be a fan of a Western Conference team. Again, Thunder fan here, you can probably tell by that up there. Like, I, again, really think we should be in the playoffs with Shea and a bunch of progression from our young guys. But again, it is just such a stacked conference. Every single game is going to be a fight. We're going to have to really lock in every night to make sure that we stay up there in the standings, because one like 5-game losing streak could be the difference from you being in the play-in tournament and not being in it at all. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this Western Conference. I'd love to hear what y'all's opinions are. Like, I'm not going to give my top 8 in this video, or my top 10 even, because again, I want to do that when the regular season is right about to roll around. Maybe a big time trade happens, like Harden goes to the Clippers, or Dame actually goes to a Western Conference team or something like that, that drastically shifts the landscape. So I'm not going to make a full prediction now, but I'd love to hear at this exact moment, who are your 8 teams that make the playoffs in the Western Conference? Give me some of your reasoning why, if you have time for that. Who makes the play-in tournament? Which one of those 11 teams is the odd man out? And is there one of those teams, the Jazz, the Blazers, the Rockets, the Spurs, that you think could actually make the play and push one of those teams out of that race and make it a 12, a 13, a 14 team race in the end? You know, is there a team that I'm overlooking? I'd love to hear what y'all have to say as usual. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Maybe I'll do a similar one breaking down the Eastern Conference a little bit. Again, I just don't think it's as close as the West for some of those teams. Like, there are certainly some teams that I anticipate being pretty close to the bottom. I think it's going to be good. Like, I don't think there are that many bad teams in the East, but I just think the West, like, it's just all so close. I don't know how that conference is going to finish. It's going to be an agonizing, we have like a month or so until the NBA regular season rolls around roughly. It's going to be really tough. And that, I feel like that prediction video is probably going to end up being one of my most disliked videos ever, because whatever team I don't put in those playoffs, or if I move someone down or up some spots, people are going to hate it, which is usually the case with these prediction videos. But yeah, appreciate y'all watching as always. Again, please let me know who you have making/missing the Western Conference playoffs, because maybe you'll say something that helps sway me one way or another and actually make a decision. But for right now, appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Everyone, stay back.